my channel, or welcome back to my channel. My name is Andy, sometimes Mouse, and I talk about books and book related things, and y'all have been asking for this video, and I always am like, what videos do you guys want to see? And then promptly never make those videos. That's not true. I do sometimes. Anyway, you guys wanted to know what my top 10 books of all time was, and it took me like 2 hours to narrow this list down. And you're probably thinking, Andy, I'm pretty sure it's more than 10 books. That's because 3 of them are in a series, and it wouldn't make sense for me not to show you all 3 of them. Actually, 2 of them are part of a series, but we'll get into it. We'll get into it. Also, I want to clarify, these are not in any particular order. If they were, I think if you've watched my videos, you'd know which one would come first. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I think you guys would know which one would come first. These are just stacked by size for the sake of I really didn't want them to fall down after I had gathered them all up from my bookshelves, which now look very empty because I grabbed all of my favorite books off of my bookshelves. Anywho, this video is my top 10 books of all time. Let's get into it. Again, no order. I'm gonna give you a brief summary of them and like what I like about them specifically and maybe why I think you should read them. I'm also gonna tell you like the genre and that kind of thing. Okay? Okay, and I try to be pretty genre fluid, if you will, with these. But we're gonna start with the manga, also because it is the smallest one, so they had to be on the top, which is gonna be Goodbye My Rose Garden by Dr. Pepper Co. This is a historical sapphic manga. I love these books. It's such a cute, it's just so cute. It is, again, historical, sapphic, romantic. I want to read them again. I should read them again. We follow Alice and Hanako, and Hanako's favorite author is Victor Frank's. This is not a spoiler, but Lady Alice is Victor Frank's. Hanako is Lady Alice's like maid, and it's about their romance as they slowly figure things out in a time when romance like this is essentially forbidden. There's only 3 books. I was devastated when I found out that there was only 3 books. I was like, what do you mean the story's over? It does end well, right? Interestingly, but I loved it. I love these books. I think about them frequently. Next up, we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is a horror book, but if you're somebody who needs answers to questions, this book does not do that for you, so I am giving you that warning. I have learned that I need to give that warning. This book is about Leah and Miri, and Miri is kind of grieving the fact that her wife goes on this deep sea science trip and is missing for a while and then comes back and things are not right. I've read this book 2 or 3 times now, and while it is listed as like a horror and there are horrifying things that happen, this book is really emotional, especially if you've had to grieve someone who's not dead. And I think that this encompasses that feeling really well. As someone who has gone through that recently, this book was just really jarring. And it also talks about like wanting to be comforted, but also wanting to be left alone and wanting to care about what's going on in other people's lives, but also wanting to go, don't you know I'm going through this thing, but you also don't want them to talk about it. Like, it just encompasses that feeling in such a really fantastic way that makes me really emotional. So I enjoyed it a lot. I also would want to add that the writing is really kind of flowery almost, but not in a descriptive flowery way, like kind of in a poetic way, I guess, if that makes sense. Next up, we have a nonfiction book called What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma by Stephanie Fu. This book destroyed me. I read this book in 1 day, which was really unexpected for a nonfiction book. I have complex PTSD, and this book destroyed me. The way that it weaves actual fact-based information and has references and everything in the back, while also weaving it into the story that Stephanie Fu is telling about her childhood and her learning to cope with and heal from complex PTSD, was so jarring, and it made me feel so seen, and I sobbed reading this, until I had a headache. Like, I cried until I had a headache reading this, because I felt so seen for the first time in a really long time. And I've read a lot of books about trauma, about complex trauma even, and this was the first book that made me feel so seen, because it talks about the interpersonal side of it rather than just the factoid side of it, rather than it being written by a therapist themselves, made me feel seen. There are obviously parts of her trauma that I can't relate to as a white person, and she's an Asian person, but regardless, despite that, it's still just, the story is just so all-encompassing and emotional, but the way that facts are included in it, I don't know how to explain that, but I really, really appreciate a nonfiction book that interweaves storytelling and science in such a way that I feel not bogged down by the science and not annoyed by the fact that I'm reading just about your personal experiences and you're lining them up as fact. That frustrates me. So this was a really healthy balance of the two. You can kind of tell that the author was a journalist for a really long time as well in the writing, and I enjoyed that a lot. Also think the cover is really, really pretty. Next up, we have a horror book that I recently reread, but have recommended to many people and have thought about frequently. It just kind of lives in my head rent-free. If you were a teenager in the 2012s, 2010s, you probably know about Perks of Being a Wallflower, right? You probably watched the movie or read the book or whatever. That author has written one other book, and it is the most horrifying fucking horror book I've read in a long time. And that would be this book, Imaginary Friend, by Stephen Chbosky. Yeah, she's long. Let's preface, she's long, and I've never listened to the audiobook, so I don't know how well this will translate as an audiobook, so I'm also giving this disclaimer because it does some fun things with the font and with the spreading out of words and the writing that I'm not sure how it would translate into an audiobook, so just take that information, if you will. This book is about this strange town. There's a single mother kind of on the run from her past. Her son Christopher goes missing, and then he comes back very, very different, and he has this sudden goal to build a treehouse. And as he and his friends are sneaking out to build this treehouse, he's getting very scary powers and very fucked up things are happening in the town. There's conversations about God and the devil and dreams and demons and childhood and fear and the way that our childhood can reflect into our adulthood and how it affects the people around us. It is really fucked up. You get about 300 pages into this 700-page book and you're like, hey, but why are there 400 more pages? Because I'm already so fucking stressed out. What do you mean? There's a line in this book that says, because God is a murderer, Daddy. Like, it's wild. It is truly a wild ride. I very much recommend it. Obviously, it's in my top 10 books. Next is going to be no surprise to anyone, and this is the one that I was talking about, that if I was putting them in order, it would be number 1, and also if I was including all of the series, this would be one of them, but I think you can get away with just reading the one. That is going to be Middle Game by Shauna McGuire. I have a whole video about me rereading this series, so you can go watch that there if you want. This book is about alchemy, and it is about twins that were made by the science of alchemy, Roger and Dodger, who are the embodiment of math and language. They are math and language made into humans, and they essentially get to become gods. Or rather, that's the goal of the alchemists. But the unfortunate thing is that the alchemists also made them human, and so they have human wants and needs, and it is not always what the alchemists had intended for them. This book is gritty and interesting, and the science of the alchemy behind it is unique, and Shannon's writing just really complements this plot. And I know that's a weird way to word this because obviously this is Shannon's plot, but her writing, like if you like the books, or the first one is called Every Heart a Doorway, I don't remember what that series is called. If you like the writing style there, then you'll probably like Middle Game. Middle Game is an age up from those books though. This is definitely an adult book, and it does have body horror aspects, so keep that in mind. It is not a horror book, but it does have body horror aspects. Right. Alchemy uses human body parts, so I feel like, oh, that's gonna focus on the books and not me. There we go, much better. Sorry. Next up, we have Starter Villain by John Scalzi. I had the pleasure of meeting John Scalzi last year at the November book festival, so I got this signed in person. I had read his other book, that I can't think of the title right now, and it was good, but this book, I still think about this book. This book made me laugh. I love the fact that there are cat spies. I love that the dolphins are organizing. Yes, I said that way on purpose. This book is funny and fun and touches on certain topics that I think in a lighthearted way that I think makes it both enjoyable, but you know the guy is paying attention to what's happening in the world around us, right? The author, I mean. And I know he does because I heard him speak in last November. Essentially, Charlie is on his last leg, like his life is going absolutely nowhere, and then he finds out that his uncle passed away and left him his business of being a villain, a super villain, and he has to take over this business and learn the its and outs and also not get murdered while, you know, learning the business of working with super villains and what makes them super villains and all of that. And it's very tongue-in-cheek, and I enjoyed that a lot. The sarcasm is just endlessly fun to me, so oh, these are gonna fall. It's gonna be a whole thing when these fall. All right, I'm gonna have to start a second stack. This is another one that I think might surprise some people, but this is The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan He. I believe this is a young adult. It is a little bit sci-fi-y because it's a little bit dystopian. C wakes up on the shore of this beach and is trying to figure out who she is and why she's there and what's going on at the same time, or rather on a different, like there's two storylines happening at the same time. Casey is a STEM prodigy and she's trying to figure out how to essentially escape because the planet is dying. Her sister has been missing, if I remember correctly, and there's just a lot of emotional pull to this. I'm not doing a good job of describing this book, and I recognize that. It's just this book where these two sisters seem to continue to be searching for each other emotionally and or physically, and it's the dynamic between sisters while also the dynamic of save one, save them all, that kind of argument. It's sci-fi because we've got robots, we've got trying to keep the planet alive in the future after we've destroyed it, we've got all of those things. And it's just a really unique take, and it was a really beautiful story, and I've read it a few times now, and I enjoyed it a lot. Next up, and this one will probably be less of a surprise because it was my top book of the year last year, that is going to be Mr. Magic by Kiersten White. This shit was crazy. First off, I love horror books that are pink, and this is a horror book, so keep that in mind. Hold, I have a kitten eating yarn that he's not supposed to be eating. Illegal. Anyway, there's this children's show that some people remember and other people don't, but anytime you try to talk about it on the internet, it gets wiped. One of the quote-unquote stars of that show is living on kind of a ranch and helping with things, but her memory of that time is missing. All of a sudden there's going to be a reunion of this show, and it brings back some of her memories of it, and you find out some really fucked up things that are going on. It's terrifying. It's terrifying, it's terrifying, it's terrifying. But also incredible, and I plan on reading it again this year, probably during Halloween, just because it is one of my favorite horror books. It is one of my favorite books, and it was really good, and I think you should read it. I actually really like all of Kiersten White's writing, I'm pretty sure. I've read all of them, and I'm pretty sure I like all of them. Don't hold me to that, though. I could be wrong. But I have read several of her books, and I know that I liked them, so. Next up, and I don't know that I've ever actually talked about this book on this channel. That's going to be Beasts and Beauty, Dangerous Tales by someone, I'm probably going to say this wrong, I can't say the last name, I'm so sorry. This is and also I'm being distracted by a small kitten. This is the author of The School for Good and Evil, which I have not read, so don't ask me about that, I don't know. This is a bunch of retellings of your favorite fairy tales, and there is fantastic art in these books. in this book, the set of stories. We've got Snow White and Rapunzel and all of these, just all of these tales that you definitely, Hansel and Gretel, you've definitely heard these stories before, but the retelling of them makes these often cast as the victim women and girls, not so much the victim. One of the things I remember is that Rapunzel is essentially tricking, if I'm remembering correctly, is essentially tricking the princess to come see her. She doesn't actually, she's not actually trapped. There's just so much of it that is so, it's just the way that it's retold, it turns it into a little bit of a horror that I feel like the Grimm fairy tales almost would have had it be if they retold it in a more modern sense. Like if they were to rewrite their Grimm fairy tales now, not to put them in modern times, but rewrote them with the context of modern times, this feels more akin to the horrors that these fairy tales originally were, rather than the fantastical sugar coating that we've kind of given so many of them, if that makes sense. I really enjoyed that. I'm so sorry if you can hear the kitten on the ground. He's just doing shit, and Last but not least, we have Cersei by Madeline Miller. This has become a bit of a comfort read for me. I reread it recently for my book club. This is a Greek retelling of Cersei, obviously. I think Madeline Miller's writing is really beautiful. I think that the way that she tells the story is fantastic. One of the criticisms that my book club kind of had was that it sort of speeds through things before it gets like into the plot. Like it's just like, this is Cersei and this is what's happening to her, before it really gets into the plot. So I will give that warning if this is something you've never picked up before. However, I think the reason for that is because Madeline Miller wanted to give the background of who Cersei is, without assuming that you already knew. Because I think that so many people go into Greek retellings assuming that you already know all of the background of all of these people, and I think this does a better job than a lot of books about giving you some ground to stand on as you learn about Cersei and as things unpack. If you've read a little bit of Greek mythology and read this, those little snippets that you might know showing up is really satisfying as well. The audiobook for this is beautiful. I think the reader does a fantastic job of telling this story. It is dark, it is fantastical, and it is one of my favorites. Again, I've read it many times. This is a special edition of it, so I don't even remember where I got this special edition. Honestly, it's signed, apparently, and I got it after I got married, so Illumicrate. Looks like it's from Illumicrate. I don't know. Back when I could afford special editions. But yeah, that is it. That is the 10th book. These are my top 10 books of all time. I really love all of these. I hope that if you pick any of them up, you love any of them. Have you read these books before? Do you want to read any of them? I'm going to stack them back up. Do you want to read any of them now that I've talked about them a little bit? I understand if not for some of them, especially if you're not a horror reader. I will say in October, I plan to do my top horror books of all time. I'll do top 10 of those as well. So you might see a few of these get repeated because of that, but that is because they're in my top 10. They're going to be in my top 10 horror books, obviously, but it is not all going to be repeated because obviously this is not all horror. So let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books or if you want to read any of these books. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. I would appreciate that too. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and if you didn't, let me know in the comments how I could make it better for you. I will do my best. Obviously, I don't expect this list to change very much anytime soon, so I don't expect to be refilming this anytime soon, but if I do, let me know. Or maybe for the top 10 horror books. I don't know. That's it. I post videos every single Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, except for the first full week of the month, because taking breaks is important for my mental health as somebody who works a lot. I think that's it. I told you guys to like and subscribe, right? Yeah, so I will see you guys on Thursday. And by the time this comes out, I think we'll be talking about Clear Your Shit, so stay tuned for some of those things. Yeah, don't forget to take your meds, drink your water, and do something today to take care of yourselves. Okay, thanks, bye.